Help people see this isn't just a choice between two names on a ballot or two personalities or all of those pieces. It's really two different futures for us as individuals. So that was the thing that really struck me right at the beginning. It was that sense of they want to take total control.
It's important to be part of a union because you have to have a voice.
Welcome to Union Talk. I'm Randi Weingarten.
Welcome to Union Talk, everyone. And this is days before the election. And frankly, this morning, I am in a hotel room as opposed to a bus. I've been basically in a bus for, the last 50 or so days. We promised that we would really do everything we could to get out the vote. And so I have been crisscrossing America since Labor Day weekend. I think by the end, it will be 20 states. We're at close to 150 stops already. But really, truly, the stakes in this election could not be more consequential, both in terms of what we need to do for America and for Americans, and in terms of what, frankly, a bunch of people on the other side are trying to do to America. So, there have been lots of other times that we've talked about Trump and his minions. And for those of you who did not see the Madison Square Garden rally or look at some of the social media from it, I would, if you have the stomach for it and have whatever gives you some salve or some balm, I'd be drinking it or eating it as you watch it. But he is very intent on doing what the New York Times Sunday opinion cover page said, which is prosecuting his enemies, ordering mass deportations, using soldiers against citizens, abandoning allies, playing politics with disasters. And as Maya Angelou has said, believe him when he says that. And people who used to work for him say he means it. And people who have been long-term Republicans like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and others have said that even though they disagree, frankly, with us with so many economic proposals, they want to save their Constitution and our democracy. So that's the Donald Trump campaign side. But even though he has run away from it, Project 2025 is the Donald Trump running the government side. And I don't really understand, frankly, the arrogance of them in writing it. Normally, they hide who they are before an election. But here it has been front and center, and they put out a 900-plus page document about what they would do if they get power. And so Donald Trump may say he renounces it, but it is institutionalizing Trump. And his running mate wrote the forward, and many of the people who have worked for him or worked for the campaign have basically edited this document or wrote this document. So instead of hearing about this document from me, I thought it was important to re-raise it and revisit it days before the election. I asked a friend of mine who is the vice president for campaigns and outreach and American Progress. That doesn't tell you just what a smarty pants he is. He is an amazingly smart guy, and he understands how to connect policy and what really happens with real people. And that is Joe Radosevich. And before Joe joined American Progress, he served with U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar, with Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro as Governor Shapiro's chief of staff. He led this kind of really important way of combining legal and communication strategies so that people actually in the real world understand what we're doing as policy wonks or policy geeks or all of that stuff. We don't do a really good job at that all the time. And Joe is really good at it and really good at understanding all of this stuff. I love that your first job, Joe, was as a prep cook. And I understand that you have not missed a GOTV weekend. since 2002. So, Joe,
That's
I
right.
am really great. It's really great that we have you to kind of dissect all of this stuff. So I would just say, look, just like Tim Walz says, you don't draw up a playbook unless you plan to use it. And so I know a bunch of our folks understand that Project 2025 abolishes the Department of Education, it scraps Head Start, it slashes funds to support students with disabilities. I'm just giving you some of the highlights. Yeah. It rescinds protections for any kid in America. It's not just LGBTQ kids, any kid in America. It rolls out universal vouchers as it undermines resources for public schools. It cuts free school lunches on healthcare and eliminates the protections for people with pre-existing conditions. It allows the monitoring of pregnancies so that they can prosecute people if they miscarry. It imprisons doctors. Yeah. It does all of these things. But the question I have for you,
900 pages.
Yes, it does. The question I really want you to answer is, what do you think? Just when you first saw it, what did you think? And then let's talk about some of these big areas where it really undermines people's freedom and opportunity. But when you first saw it, what did you think?
Well, thank you very much for having me and for all the work you and your members do. Spent many hours in different AFT buildings all around the country, including in Minneapolis for about 2 weeks, 6 years ago. So it's great to be here. When I first saw Project 2025, this version of the mandate for leadership, I was really stunned by the degree to which they have abandoned what they at least say they have been for at times and put in a totally radical proposal to take complete control, to just roll back all of the things, so much of what we've fought for, my grandparents have fought for a long time, and give power to those who already have the most power, the most resources, the most money, the most connections. And we're going to pay the price. I mean, this is a plan to make the next conservative president, Trump, the most powerful president ever. It's a plan to get rid of some of the checks and balances that we've relied on to protect us at work, to put programs in place that actually help people. We'll have time to unpack some of those. But a lot of the things in here don't necessarily require Congress. Some of the things are dangerous and it would have to go through Congress, have to go through a process. But many of the things here are regulatory. They're things that they could do very quickly. And the thing I was sort of struck by so much right at the beginning is they have put that plan for control down in a way that they really haven't before.
Right.
And you talked about these guys, who they are and this playbook. They spent $22 million drawing this up. Even for a billionaire, you don't flush $22 million down a toilet. If you drop a plan, you want to use it. And that money and that time that they spent has really allowed us, I think very importantly, to help people see this isn't just a choice between two names on a ballot or two personalities or all of those pieces. It's really two different futures for us as individuals. Right. So that was the thing that really struck me right at the beginning. It was that sense of they want to take total control.
Yeah, so I think when you say, Joe, that they're walking away from who, at least modern day Republicans have been. Modern day Republicans used to say, and, I'm just a high school social studies teacher, so bear with me if I simplify things, but they used to be the party of small government. They used to believe that you let locals and school boards and the will of the people and let them do what they believe, and that the federal government should not have such control. This seems like it's turning that totally on its head.
Totally. One of the directors, Paul Dance, the director, Trump's chief of staff at the Office of Personnel Management. So this is the guy who helped Trump hire everybody last time around. He was one of the main authors, of Project 2025. And one of his quotes about this was, we need to reintroduce political control over the bureaucracy. That's the importance of Project 2025. And so if you think about that small government vision you just laid out, it's a complete break from where this is, where you have, one of Trump's minions saying, no, we got to break away from that. We got to take control over this whole bureaucracy to put our plan forward.
And the other thing, which I've seen and watched in the last few years, like take it on student debt, then they are menacing with their lawsuits. Like every day, they bring another lawsuit to try to stop a government entity from actually regulating or enforcing or instituting, one of Biden's priorities. And we see this in terms of AGs working with private companies like Mohila. So they're actually on the Biden side of this. They're basically saying, oh no, we're going to try and do everything we can to stop you. But yet what they're talking about is using those bodies of government to do exactly what they're complaining that Biden is trying to do right now.
Yeah. Well, I think about how this impacts schools potentially, like right away.
Yeah.
Something that was done through regulation wasn't a change in law. It was about like school meals. It was allowing basically if a certain number of students were going to qualify for free lunch, get a meal at school, it would be more efficient. It would save on some of the bureaucratic costs. It would reduce stigma if we made that available to more children in the school or in the district.
Yeah.
Right. It saved time, it saved money. It's very effective. And this is one of the things that Project 2025 would get away with. And they could do it pretty quickly, because it's one of these regulatory steps. And you brought up student loans. And that's another area where many of the changes that have been an improvement, and they have taken too long, and it's taken lawsuits, and there's a lot more to do, haven't been because of Congress.
Right.
And it's stuff that they could change right away. So like we ran some of the numbers on Project 2025 for the average new teacher in Pennsylvania under Project 2025, the amount that they would be paying in student loans would almost triple a month. And over the course of their career, they would pay double what they would be paying under current law. They would get rid of the public service loan forgiveness program. Yep. They would get rid of the teacher loan forgiveness program, which can kick in for some teachers in about 5 years. And it's just one of many, it's 900 pages of this stuff, but it's just one of these many examples of things they could do really quickly. And sometimes we think change happens so slowly, and it does when you do it legally and when you're trying to bring people together. But when you have a vision to sort of run roughshod over our checks and balances, and your ultimate goal is really to just pull the rug out from under the middle class because you're sick and tired of, I suppose, doing your fair share, you can be quick. And that's one of two areas that hits for educators and in schools really quick.
So let's do 4 areas just because, given who our listenership is. Yeah. Let's do education, healthcare, labor, and then rule of law. Let's do those kind of 4 areas in terms of this. I think we started in terms of education because, the moment somebody says, oh, take away the Department of Education, like nobody likes the bureaucracy. I mean, I don't like the bureaucracy. Right. Nobody likes bureaucracy and red tape. So it doesn't have the same impact as what the fine print says. So you already talked about, there's 2 issues that we've already talked about, and I don't know if you want to dwell on it a little bit more. Student loan debt, which we frankly sued to get public service loan forgiveness actually implemented correctly. There's now finally 1 million people who should have gotten it who now get it. It's life-changing for all of them. They just say goodbye. They would just throw it out again, just like Betsy DeVos did, make it incomprehensible. When she was there were 2% of the people who could get it, got it. And now 98% of the people who can get it. And that's the difference between these 2 administrations. And, it basically says, for those of you who don't know, if you worked in the public service, whether a teacher, a nurse, in the Army for 10 years, the rest of your loans are forgiven. Period. Full stop. It's because you're doing something for the public. So
Yeah.
that would be gone. But lunches, the same kind of thing. School lunch, also money in people's pocket, just like student loans, money in people's pockets. What else would it do? What else is their target on their back in terms of Project 2025 as it pertains to education and parents, teachers, and kids?
So those are two examples that are just quick. They can do them pretty within one term, probably.
Yeah.
And longer term, some of the things that they've described, you mentioned at the top, okay, get rid of the Department of Education. And I think what's important about that is when you drill down a little bit more into those pages of the plan, they talk about ending Title I, which helps serve, it's funding for certain types of schools that comes from the federal government. And if that funding wasn't replaced by local revenue, and there's no way that all of it could be, it would lead to a loss of 180,000 teaching positions around the country, including over 6,000 in Pennsylvania, 5,300 in Michigan. I mean, these are a ton of teaching positions in generally rural or lower income districts that don't have the tax base to provide what's necessary. So that's one of the longer term plans. It's not just get rid of the Department of Education. It's get rid of federal support for so many different types of districts. Head Start is another one that I think people hear about a lot. And that's something that, 783,000 low-income children in the country depend on. And in a lot of rural areas especially, it can be one of the only childcare facilities that's available.
Yeah.
And so those are things that might take a little bit longer, but are central to the plan. And I think when we get to labor, we'll talk about this, but there's a real connection here because when you put it all on 900 pages, you can see what they're really trying to do. And they're not looking at kids as future citizens and as future inventors and entrepreneurs and writers. They're looking at them as resources to exploit. And it's a big element of this whole plan. But we have seen this strategy work in the past when teenagers would be having to go to work to support a family, for example. And ultimately, the threat to public education here is because they don't want a future where kids can all go through and graduate and be effective citizens.
So any teacher who is in the United States of America knows Title I because we know what Title I has done is help get a para in a classroom, helped us buy books or help create a coordinator for community schools. So every one of the teachers in America knows what Title I is. And when you say get rid of Title I, that's basically 10% of the budget. And frankly, the red states get more Title I than the blue states, and so it's just the irony of all that. But it's also IDEA funding. That's all the funding for kids with disabilities, which are not nearly as much funding as we need to do, but it's all of that stuff as well. So let's go to, this is really, Project 2025 is really a war on children if you actually unpack all of this stuff. So let's do labor for a minute because you just talked a little bit about that. People like if you're in the labor movement, we understand what it means when we talk about how to organize. And when you have a National Labor Relations Board that basically will not, so you have an organizing campaign going on, and the boss decides to fire the organizers or fire the people inside the shop, the organizers, and then the NLRB never takes the case or it takes, years, it kills the organizing. So when we say it's an anti-union organizing board, that's what we mean. But that's what I'm saying in terms of what you've done is so plain Englishly about it. It's so good. So tell us a little bit more about what the wrench is that Project 2025 does in terms of labor.
So they have, for those who want to look it up, it kind of starts around page 595. And they have a lot of ideas about ways they can tweak a system that's already kind of stacked against organizing and make it even tougher. And some of the ones that really jumped out at us is they would allow companies to sort of bust unions in secret. And how would they do that? The persuader rule, something put in place, during the Obama years, where employers had to disclose when they were hiring sort of union busting consultants or people who they would bring in to sort of argue why you wouldn't want to organize. And they used to be able to keep those things secret. And the persuader rule helped show, you have to have some of this out in public. You have to have people know what it's going to be. They'd get rid of that. Another one, the protected activity. So you're talking about union organizers, what can you do in a workplace? What can't you do? And they would eliminate many of the protections where people are protected against retaliation for when they do engage in some union activity. That's on page 601. And another one is allowing companies, employers to decertify unions mid-contract. They would get rid of the contract R rule. And what that really means is that, you have a certification election when you're first organizing in a workplace. And the people who are working there choose whether or not they want to be in solidarity, they want to bargain together or not. And the contract bar rule says that, once that happens, you have to let the workforce, you got to let people actually work together for a little bit of time before they choose whether or not they're staying in the union. The contract bar rule could mean that would come up over and over and over again. And an employer could come in and basically force that vote about whether or not you're going to work together, whether or not you're going to be part of a union, really at any time. And that's page 603. And there are so many of these things, but another that jumps out is the state waivers that they want to give for the Fair Labor Standards Act and the National Labor Relations Act. There are a lot of different ways that could be used or misused by states to disregard overtime or minimum wage laws, or allow states to contract out different types of work so it wouldn't be done by union employees. And this list of impacts is it's incredibly long, but it's also surgical to weaken the power of people to use their voice together.
Yeah.
On page 82, it says, and this is why Project 2025 in some ways is useful, because they are not hiding who they are or what they want to do. And on page 82, it starts out when they're talking about public sector unions. Quote, Congress should reconsider whether public sector unions are appropriate in the first place, and that union representation of government workers is, quote, incompatible with democracy. Their words.
Yeah. They want to they've tried to kill us in any way. So I just want people to hear this, that they want to use federal law to eliminate public sector unions. I don't think I overstated that.
No. And on, so those are some of the things with organized labor. But even if you're not a member of a union, some of the things that they want to do when it comes to labor is really damaging and concerning, like with overtime pay. So right now, there is a minimum threshold. If you make under a certain amount of money and you work more than 40 hours in a certain type of job, you have to get overtime pay. And you might have seen some headlines or reports, some stories, they want to get rid of overtime pay. And what that really means is they have a plan to allow employers to calculate it based on, say, every 2 weeks or every month. So rather than if you work more than 40 hours in a week, they would say, well, did you work more than 80 hours in 2 weeks? Or did you work more than, 160 over the whole month? Now, you imagine what that would actually do to scheduling for a family that had to think about childcare pickup, that had to think about their paycheck and what's coming in. If you never really knew what your hours were going to be and what you would get for that. And if your employer was able to say, we're going to be really busy for this order, you're going to have to work 60 hours this week, but, nothing next.
Yep.
And they would give all that control away, that certainty that some employees have right now, and give more of that to companies. We know they would do this because they're doing it when they can. And Project 2025 lays that out, where Trump would be able to lower the minimum threshold to get overtime and potentially get rid of many of those regulations entirely.
So I do not understand why these guys go after healthcare. I mean, one of the things that are most I understand the control stuff, as venal as it is. And I think that Michelle Obama did one of the best jobs that I've heard this entire campaign season in terms of really unpacking what taking away or Roe v. Wade really means, and unpacking it for maternal health, and unpacking it in terms of any kind of family planning, or God forbid, any kind of issues go wrong with a pregnancy that doctors are totally like, they now have to make not a Hippocratic oath value statement. They have to decide whether they're going to jail or whether they're going to actually help a woman who may be miscarrying or who may have some kind of ectopic pregnancy or things like that. But unpack what they're doing in terms of healthcare, because healthcare is not a Republican or a Democratic value. Is this just about control and money and who their donors are? What is going on in terms of their crusade against having better healthcare in America?
Well, we've talked a little bit about some of the reproductive health pieces, and I think with that, it is unfortunately easiest to understand that as a means of control.
Got it.
And, I think that the plan to sort of misapply some of these old laws that are on the book to stop people from being able to mail mifepristone, mail medication abortion, the most common type of drug, to have a sort of de facto national ban. I don't think that is because someone's going to be profiting a ton off of it. But many of the other things that they want to do with healthcare, I think, do kind of go back to money in that way. So they have, you might remember people talked about, Obamacare having death panels, right? And the smear that was, the lie that was. Well, Project 2025 actually kind of has it. It has lifetime caps on Medicaid benefits. So for people who are very poor, working poor, who can qualify for Medicaid and are able to access care now, more can access care now than before Obamacare passed, they propose putting lifetime caps on benefits. And what this means is that about 18 million enrollees would be at risk of losing coverage. So basically, if you were not able to maybe work and support yourself, maybe you have some type of condition that is a rare disease or costs a lot to take care of, you could hit that cap. And under their plan, your life isn't worth it anymore to them.
Yep.
And that is one of the things that we haven't talked a lot about Project 2025, but it could impact a ton of people around the country. And that's just, if you're not able to pay for your own insurance, your life isn't worth it to them. The other is with drug prices. We have been talking about the need to negotiate for lower drug prices for many years. And it is a utter shame how long it took to give the government the ability to negotiate lower costs for prescription drugs. But it's happening now. And we have caps for people who are in Medicare now, for generally older folks who have coverage that way. And with a drug like Jardiance for diabetes, we've negotiated prices now. Project 2025 would stop negotiation with the pharmaceutical companies right away. And for drugs like Jardiance or for Enbrel, which is for rheumatoid arthritis, we could see those prices go up potentially immediately, because that's being challenged in court and those negotiations are not finalized. It is hard to see the reason for that other than greed and other than a desire to squeeze as much money out of the American people as possible.
I was doing canvassing this week in Nashua and Manchester this weekend. And in talking to a senior, that issue that you just raised, Joe, the time it takes to get there, like the Inflation Reduction Act passed a year and a half ago, but it took till, if you look at your Medicare, sorry, I'm over 65, I'm looking at all that stuff. You look at the Medicare options this year, all of a sudden you see what's happening in terms of drug negotiations and the impact. But it takes a long time to get this stuff right. And in some ways, if Harris does win, and I hope she does, and we're doing everything we can to help, this moving things faster, I think, is something that's going to be important. And cutting some of this red tape is something that's going to be really important to do, long term in terms of the federal government. But
Absolutely.
That brings me to the last issue that I want to just get your take on, which is on some ways where I started, which, as a civics teacher, when you hear presidential candidates saying, and I'm going to use the New York Times cover page again, use soldiers against citizens, prosecute his enemies. This is a complete anathema to American democracy. This is exactly why the colonists, fought the American Revolution in 1776 and on and on and on. But in here, there are some really venal things about how they create control and take away regular folks' democracy and vote. And you want to go through one or two of them so that people hear it's in the plan. They have thought about how to do what Trump is saying publicly.
Yeah. I want to start with one that we don't always, hear about a ton, because I do think for educators, for teachers, you can really think about how this might interact with something like Title I funding, for example.
Yeah.
So they have a legal theory around the use of a, quote, impoundment power. And President Nixon tried to use this some, but basically we understand that Congress has the purse, right? The House has the purse. Like, our representatives decide where tax dollars are supposed to go. And the idea of impoundment power is that a president could condition federal funding themselves. They could withhold those payments to a local government or a state that they didn't like for some reason. And you already have seen Trump do this with disaster relief. Is he going to provide disaster relief to a state that he maybe has a problem with? Might they choose not to give Title I funding, or try to not give Title I funding to a school district that, I don't know, taught race in a certain way, taught about slavery in a certain way, taught about history, actually? That is one of the ways that they see an ability to influence lots of different policy choices, is the impoundment power. Others that have gotten a little more attention, that they've been very...
In fact, he said on Fox and 5 last, I guess a week ago, Friday, we kind of seized on it quickly. He went from, states should control, to no, I am going to control, and I think using this power. If I don't I can't impersonate him. But it was essentially, if I don't like what you're teaching in terms of history, I'm going to impound those funds.
Yeah. And we've seen them say this with all sorts of different policy areas. Another that they have not shied away from at all, really, I think we talked about it kind of a little bit at the beginning about getting control over the bureaucracy. They have a plan right now. The president gets to hire around 4,000 sort of political appointees. These are people who help put in place, the policies the president wants to do, whatever side, Democrat, Republican, whatever. They have a plan. You might hear about it being called Schedule F, that would sort of reclassify at least 50,000. There are different estimates that go higher. People out of the civil service and as political appointees, so that the president could hire or fire them right away. So just off the bat, that's more than 10 times, right, the number of political appointees a president has today. And these are people who can get into the weeds of regulation. And right now, they swear an oath to the American people and to uphold the law. And they want to change that with people who would swear an oath to a person, a political ideology that's shown a willingness to break the law, to do what they want to do. So Schedule F, that could be things like, a physician or an engineer or an expert of some kind. You could see the FDA, for example, which is supposed to regulate drugs, make sure they're safe for us. Well, we know the right, if that's even the right name to call these folks, but these Trump minions, they don't believe that some medication, for example, should be allowed around abortion, for example. They have a lawsuit to say that it's not safe. It's not backed up by any science. But if they replaced the political appointees, newly political appointees, right? And instead of being hired because you actually know something about medicine at the FDA, you were hired because you support a certain ideology, would they be able to reclassify certain drugs and say that they're not safe anymore, they're not allowed? That's the kind of control that they could have if you get rid of the civil service and you can repeat that story in agency after agency after agency.
So I know we are running out of time, but I just really want to ask you the following question. How do you fight this? Now that we see what it is, I've noticed there's no Republicans that are running on this. They know how unpopular it is, but they've written this playbook. So how do we fight this right now? Because this clearly impacts all sorts of people's day-to-day life. How do we fight this?
Yeah. Well, obviously, defeating Trump is a huge blow to Project 2025, but ideas don't die. And I think, part of what is happening right now is the authors behind this plan think that now is a good time to try and roll back all of the things that we have done for around 100 years to give people more control over their own lives. Because there's so much uncertainty in our economy, there's been so many changes in our media landscape, they see an opportunity now to take power. And so, in addition to what's so important about this election, we need to confront the ideas that they're pushing, which really boil down to, in this uncertain time, right? We need a strong man. We need order. We need action. We can go down a different path and talk about how dark that can be. But, when we defeated this, and when our grandparents, defeated this in the United States, it wasn't only by they couldn't compare it to what was happening in some other country in Europe. They weren't relying on historical precedent all the time. They weren't talking about fascism always in that way. They were explaining and organizing with people. These are the folks who are going to make you work day and night. These are the people who are trying to squeeze everything out of you. They're trying to limit your voice. And really what we need to do is a little more organizing. We need to be reaching out to people we don't agree with. We need to be making sure that kind of crazy uncle is still coming to Thanksgiving. We need to be expanding the base and explaining what they're really trying to do. They don't care about whether or not a 14-year-old that's not sure about, what gender they are is going to have a chance to have a good life. They just want to distract and divide in order to get more power because things are changing right now and people are unsettled. And that is when they'd strike.
Yeah. So I think that is an amazing way to end this podcast. I want to say thank you to Joe for being on the show today and for educating people and about what really is in Project 2025 and the impact it has on everyday lives. And if you want to see more of Joe's work on Project 2025, you can go to democracyforward.org or you can read my take on it on AFT.org. But I think that what Joe just said in terms of the end, which has been the through line for this whole show, this whole podcast, which is this is about control. This is about taking control, vesting or divesting control of our lives from us and putting it into and concentrating power in the federal government. It is, in some ways, what we fought against as a country in World War II. But it's done in a different kind of way. And it is preying on people's fears as opposed to people's hopes. But the details really matter, whether it's getting rid of school lunches or public service loan forgiveness, or basically taking out the experts in the federal government and replacing them with people who only owe allegiance to Donald Trump, or whether it's taking away all of Title I or getting rid of pre-existing conditions as that you can't take away health care. based upon pre-existing conditions, or whether it is basically monitoring doctors or teachers. This is all in there. And so thank you, Joe, for actually illuminating the words in that 900-page document and making it real for us about what they're trying to do. And for everyone else, please, it's early vote right now. This election is the most consequential of our life, and certainly of my lifetime. And if we don't want any of these things to happen, there is one thing to do, which is to defeat Donald Trump. And this is Union Talk. Have a great day.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Union Talk. Remember to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast and tune in every other week for a new episode. Thank you, be safe, and be well.